your understanding of these homes and that, and just.
Wi-Fi
That's a big difference with me, so.
Try number 4, the city, all lowercase.
Did y'all hear that?
Let's see, that silence is getting, I think it's me in trouble.
Not yet.
Good.
Does it ring?
No, I don't want it to.
You shut it off.
Did it rain?
What's that?
Rain. Not
My
rain.
phone, I don't want it to ring. so
Oh,
Remember to shut it off.
I forgot to shut mine off.
It doesn't look like there's too many
Nope.
interested citizens tonight.
Nothing on there really to get anybody excited.
No.
This is like kind of sleepy.
I had a meeting. I was.
Kind of a sleeper conference. The meeting 2 meetings ago, I thought was gonna be, I didn't realize it was gonna be that the detached. It would be such a hot topic. I want to get to solve. People. Yeah, there's something I did not gather in that staff report.
Reese, you can come over and join us. if you want.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't matter. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. We're live on YouTube.
Ready? All right. Welcome, everyone, to our North Logan City Planning and Zoning Commission meeting on March 2nd. Glad to have you here. We will start with the pledge by Heron and the prayer by Kenny.
Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank thee that we have this opportunity to gather tonight as a planning commission here in the North Logan municipality. And we ask you to please guide us with wisdom and that we will be able to make decisions that are good for our community and for our citizens, and that we can listen to all sides of the discussion. And we're so grateful for the moisture that has blessed us with here in this area this year, and for the blessing it is to live here in such a wonderful city. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. We need to have a motion to adopt the agenda. Anybody willing?
I so move.
Any second?
I second.
Okay, so moved and seconded. Heron made the motion. Kenny seconded it to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. We need to approve the minutes of our February 2nd planning and zoning meeting. Hopefully all of you, I know some of you have read through them. So we need to have a motion to approve those minutes.
So commissioners, you've previously approved the first item in those sets of minutes. This is now the full set of that meeting.
I haven't even
Right.
looked at 'em.
Oh. So
The
you,
ones that just came out.
so what we reviewed via email was not what we're,
No, it was,
It is.
it's just a portion of that meeting
Oh,
is what
yeah.
you reviewed via email.
Just the
Okay.
rest of the meetings on here.
oh, it is in the packet here.
It's
Okay.
in the packet.
If you're not ready to approve the full set, we'd like to ratify the approval of the first item in that we've already reviewed via email. So Heron has an ability to give his approval as well.
A quick question, are any of us not ready to approve those minutes?
I'm
I
ready.
read the stuff and gave my acknowledgement to them via email, the first part. I've
Right.
not read what came out today.
It's not, it's
Just, oh, so Just the working session. Oh, yeah, okay. So it's
Yeah.
just 3 lines that talks about the commission work session,
Do you
item
wanna
number
see
3. Work session
Oh, I-
discussion
yeah.
regarding a city initiated text amendment
Yeah,
to
you
the
did.
subdivision and development standards for RE5.
Oh, sorry. Jeff's looking over it quickly. So
ready,
are we
It's in your
ready?
Packet there, Aaron.
I've got
That's
that.
fine.
Okay. All right. Everybody okay to move along with this one?
I move we approve the meeting minutes from the
February
20
2nd.
February 2nd meeting.
Okay, Kenny has made a motion. We need a second.
Aaron Hoyt seconds it.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of the February 2nd Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, great. We will move on. Emily, I'm not Emily. You're Emily. You're Lindsay. Yes. Lindsay, our mayor's here and we'd like to give her a few minutes to talk with us before we move on to our exciting meeting tonight.
One thing I learned when I became mayor is that it came with chairing the police commission on Thursday night. So I was really excited to have Thursday nights free and realized that that was short-lived. So anyway, we happen to have that rescheduled tonight. So I have the chance to come here. What I wanted to do is just briefly talk to you guys because I don't want there to be any sort of misunderstanding between the bodies that the city council didn't consider your negative recommendation on the ordinance that passed last night. I'm not sure if you guys were aware of that, but we did pass the ordinance relating to storage units and solid waste facilities. I'm just going to list out those reasons, but initially, I just want to say we really rely on all of you to vet. I know firsthand the work that goes into getting ordinances where they need to be before the city council even considers them. And I just want to express my appreciation for that. I value each of your opinions and I know the work that goes into that. So, but just by way of background about the ordinance last night, I've had a lot of conversations. Jeff and I have had multiple conversations. So have Nan and I. I've also spoken with the applicants for the pending conditional use permit several times to address some of their issues and the impact of this ordinance change on their situation. As a staff and as a city, we've committed to working with them because it's truly not our intent as a city to stick it to anyone to say, you know, aha, we actually want to go back on our word and here's an avenue to do that. So I didn't want that to be in any way misconstrued. Anyway, the other thing I just want to take some credit, blame, however you want to put it, for is kind of the push recently to come to a decision about this ordinance. We get a moratorium during that 6-month period where we're considering an ordinance where new applications, where we can push pause on those applications. But when that 6-month period runs out, we can't consider an ordinance forever. And it just is deemed to as not apply to any new applications. So if I understand correctly, the consideration of this ordinance began in November in earnest. So we effectively have until May-ish to make a decision. One of the big things that swayed me on this is that inaction in this situation was not neutral. So I like to be cautious. That's typically where I err on the side of the least impact when making these sorts of legislative decisions. But in this case, if we were to not pass the ordinance, then we are bound to issue those conditional use permits for storage units in our city. And that's something that I think that's our overarching duty for the city, is to have long-term strategic planning on behalf of our citizens. And I view this as a temporary measure. I hope and plan to reintroduce it as we discuss with a consultant on our general plan. Where these kinds of facilities or where they belong in our city. I didn't want that to be Scott's role here, because I don't think any one person really has the expertise to do that. Also, I didn't see preemptive zoning as a true alternative here, because if we were to create a specific zone where storage units would be appropriate, we would be zoning it specifically for storage units, not for the potential for storage units. So it's kind of became an all or nothing thing. Either we allow it in all commercial, or we create a zone where that belongs and we're binding that land to its use. The other thing that Buzzy brought up last night that I thought was really helpful is, what if we have a scenario where we have an applicant that comes in and they have a really attractive facility that falls into this sort of ban? Is there a way that we can welcome them into our city? And Scott brought up that we can spot zone at that point, that we can create a zone for that facility. Again, not something that we can preemptively do. Okay. And then I think final thing is that we really wanted to separate the utility of this ordinance from the pending conditional use permit. Because I view those as two separate issues. If the ordinance is a valid one, if it's one that's useful for our city, I don't want it to fail because of the impact on this one applicant, and vice versa. I don't want us to pass the ordinance so that this one applicant gets denied. So I don't want that to wag the dog, so to speak. Anyway, I hope this isn't out of place. I just felt like it was important to not have it be a completely distinct body that's just kind of acting alone. I want you to know that we really care about the basis for your decisions. And I'll commit to doing a better job of communicating between the two bodies, and through Scott and through Emily, who's assigned to the Planning Commission. So anyway, thanks for all your hard work. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. I think it's good to know that you have served on this commission too, and you know what it's like. So we appreciate that. I just have to say, the last meeting, Jeff made a comment that was interesting, and I thought about this even before that meeting, since I've been on this commission. He said these decisions are going to affect these people. And I thought about that, and every decision we make is going to affect somebody. And so it's our job to be as informed as we can. And I appreciate that Scott gets the word out to us to look through the issues that are happening. And we have an opportunity to go through that and be aware. And sometimes it doesn't make any sense to me, and Scott's got to explain it. But I'm grateful for that, Scott. That's appreciative for us. And it's our duty, I think, to objectively look at things and try and figure out what we think is the best thing for our city, the impact it's going to make on our city and in the future of our city. And so we get to do that. And we also, one thing we need to do is stay on task, because everybody has their agenda and they want to talk about something that's not the issue. And it's our job to stick to the issue, get through that, and then move on to the next issue. So I appreciate working with you people and appreciate that you're even here doing this. Anyway, Scott, your turn. You want to tell us about other things from previous meetings?
Yeah, so that was the big item we wanted to just address. Two other items. So we have tentatively scheduled for our next planning commission meeting, a public hearing to consider the amendments to the RE5 zoning allowances. We've talked about that twice now, and I think we're to a point where we'll have a specific proposal, a staff report, and a public hearing for you to consider at our next meeting. So just keep an eye open for that. It'll come out probably sometime next week for you to review ahead of that meeting. And then also a reminder that next Wednesday, the 8th of March at 1 p.m., there will be an appeal hearing in this room for the conditional use permit that was denied back on the 2nd of February for the detached accessory dwelling unit. So those of you who would like to attend are welcome to. It's open to the public. It's not a public hearing, but it is open to the public. So you're welcome to attend, but we'll fill you in on the outcome if you're not able. But just a reminder that that's a past item that is still somewhat out there as far as a discussion point. So
Scott, I was planning to be here for that. What is our role in that meeting? Do we
just to observe.
sit and observe?
Now just observe. The hearing is reviewed by the third party appeals hearing officer. They're reviewing the record. The applicant will be here. I believe they have representation. It'll be a discussion about the record. So I don't believe that there will be any question and answering. Although I have not been in an appeal hearing with our appeals hearing officers, this will be a first. So we'll kind of learn together.
And it's 1 o'clock. you said.
1 p.m. Yep.
Here.
Next Wednesday right here. Okay, that's the only other follow-up item from previous meetings that I wanted to bring you guys up to speed on.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to item number 1. Work session discussing regarding the city's current subdivision access requirements and potential updates to facilitate interconnectivity. Scott, walk us through this one.
Yeah, so I printed this out in red line format for you guys to follow along because there's several pages, and trying to show you on this screen is just not easy to do. So there's line numbers on the draft here, so we can follow the line numbers and we'll kind of poke our way through. But the crux of this this text amendment is to improve our connectivity through subdivision access and our interconnectivity between existing and future subdivisions. So I think everybody is aware of our 750-foot rule. That sound fair? Commissioner Tyre, if you look at the last page, let's just jump to line 500, about five or six pages in from the back. Okay, so this is our existing language in the subdivision ordinance with regards to access. And this is access that's required for new subdivisions that are taking access off our existing street network and providing new access to new lots being subdivided. And when you read through this, what it basically states, if you want to read through it in detail, you're welcome to, but in a nutshell, you may not extend more than 750 feet off of the existing public street network without making a secondary point of egress. So to put that into context, we'll just look at a map so you can kind of wrap your head around what that means. Okay, so we'll go up to just east of the Upper Canal, looking at Foothill Drive. Okay, so this is a subdivision that just came in. This is Orchard View Estates, and the distance from Canyon Ridge Drive to its terminus should be right around 750. Yeah. So this is as far as this street network would be permitted to extend until a secondary point of egress is made. So what is challenging about that is we've got a lot of internal block area that is developable, that these runs of road that are being dedicated on a project by project basis can no longer provide access to the inner block. Okay. And this is the case in several areas of town where we're a little bit handicapped in the ability to make these roads connect. And what is challenging is you'll see there's multiple ownership throughout this area. So you have to get a lot of cooks in the kitchen to make some, bigger planning decisions. And then I'll execute on a proposal to develop and make these road connections all at once under our existing language, which it's just not going to happen. So what we're looking at with this proposal is to keep the intent of this 750-foot rule on permanently terminal streets, which basically means a road that is intended to be a dead end forever. We don't want those to go beyond 750 feet. So we're going to preserve that requirement. However, there's many areas in town, especially along master planned roads. I'm going to pull up the transportation master plan, where we want those streets to not be terminal. We want them to connect and make sure we have good interconnectivity. So let's go to our webpage, and you guys can go here as well if you'd like in your free time. But under the engineering, if you want some fun evening research, this is our transportation master plan. And let's take a look at that same roadway that we were looking at just a minute ago. These are master plan streets. So these are the streets that we know we want to connect, a part of our backbone connectivity grid, so to speak. Right now, this road extends to this point. But it's master planned. We know we want it to connect further south and then connect into 2600, which is also a master planned road. So in these instances, we want to make sure that there's ability for the development to continue down this pathway as planned, without handicapping our ability to incrementally make those roads connect. Initially, there was some concern with fire access and the fire code indicating, a 750-foot length was the maximum. But upon reading the fire code, there is actually not a cap on the length of a fire access road that is terminal. There is a requirement, however, that a fire access road that extends beyond 750 feet have special approval from the fire marshal. So essentially, if there's a road over 750 feet, the fire marshal needs to approve its width, its composition, its weight bearing capacity, and its turnaround capability. So if a fire truck were to get down a 1,000-foot road, they need to be able to turn around, and the road also needs to support its weight. So the idea being in this draft that we scrap the existing language, we'll keep the intent of it, but we'll carve out a provision that along the master plan roads will allow it to extend beyond 750 feet as long as it continues along that master planned trajectory, how we want it to extend, but preserve the ability to be safe, meet the fire code, and make the connectivity that we like. So I'm going to skip through a little bit because this first section are some definitions that we'll be adding that are not crux to the proposal, but we'll come back in a minute. Let's jump down to line 330, about halfway through the packet. Okay, so this is in the subdivision ordinance, and these are the development requirements for subdivision in residential areas. There's another section that's specific to commercial, but this is more specific to just residential subdivision connectivity. So in these next couple of lines, you'll see all of this is added text. And see, what's hard about this online document is it doesn't keep the line numbers. Too far. There we go. I don't know if that's legible up there. Okay, so I've added in some language. Now this language is
330.
line 330. Yeah. This language is not new language. This isn't unvetted language. This is language that is pulled from other municipalities that have looked through this over a period of several years with a lot of dialogue with their fire marshal, with their engineering department, their planning department. And they were asking this exact same question. How do we get streets to connect over a long distance and do it in a way that's planned and anticipated? And this is the language that came out of that. And I was lucky enough to work in this planning department and I didn't work on this language specifically, but I was ancillary to it. And I knew of its creation, and it just recently passed. This is newer language, and Weber County worked on this for almost 3 years until its adoption. But generally speaking, so streets generally, we're talking about street configurations that whenever a new subdivision comes in, we want to make sure that if you look in D1AA, so the next page starting on line 337, that all streets, that we ensure that all streets are a continuation of existing streets and can logically and reasonably be connected along the same street alignment. We want to have logical interconnectivity. B, provide for the continuation of new streets into adjoining undeveloped land. This is important because developers are always tempted to stop in the middle of their parcel and not connect to the periphery, which would allow for logical development to occur organically over time. We landlock other landowners, and then they have to find a way to provide connectivity into themselves. So we want to make sure every development needs a stub to the adjacent undeveloped property in a way that makes sense. So it's a continuation of existing streets. Okay. C, not avoid the requirements of this section by shifting the responsibility of providing a street onto landowners of adjacent undeveloped or undeveloped parcels. This will happen often where a road is close to where it's planned, and they'll just say, oh, the road can go on the neighbor's parcel because it's still along that general alignment. But if you're the first one in, you've got to provide that access, and you can't shirk the responsibility onto the next property owner. And then D, not create any unnecessary hardship to providing street connections on or to other parcels in the general areas deemed appropriate by the land use authority. So kind of the same concept. So generally, when you put streets into a subdivision, we want you to follow these general principles of good development. Okay, B, master plan street. When we're looking at the transportation master plan, these are the master plan streets. And for example, these parcel owners, when they come to us to develop, they will be required to put the street in roughly along that alignment so that that planned street will connect. So let's just take, for example, this parcel here. Right now, the road is stubbed to this point, right? That's where that subdivision ended. When and if they come in to develop, we'll take a look at the master transportation plan, and they will need to come to us with a design that generally follows this alignment. Okay. And that allows for this master plan street to eventually end up where it's planned to be aligned. Okay. So this section here, B on line 347, is the intent saying when you come in and there's a master plan street, you're expected to put the street in that configuration. Now they'll obviously pull off some substreets to try to provide access to, you know, all the developable area. And that is where it's generally up to their discretion for design. But this is non-negotiable. It does have to go in with just a little bit of wiggle room, as we'll work around some constraints, but it does need to be generally in that alignment. Commissioner?
Scott, what is the acreage on that piece that you're going through, right?
It
Yeah,
is
that one.
17.11.
Okay.
So fairly substantial. Several lots could be made out of it. Okay. BA, so starting on 351, this is where we will allow for minor deviations from that master plan street. But obviously they're minor. You're not going to push it all the way to the edge of the parcel and not have it follow the planned alignment. Okay. Street grades. Now this section is, I think we need to have a little bit more discussion with our engineering department on the street grades. This is the existing language. 8% is our maximum, with the ability to grant variances up to 10. I believe this is the intent going forward. I don't know that we need to change it, but I was curious if there was any issue with this grade. So we might leave it be. We might have some discussions with the fire marshal and the engineer to see if this section needs any adjustment. I don't know. So I've highlighted it for now. Okay. Angle of intersecting streets. We want to make sure that our intersections are at least 80%. You get some of these funky Y intersections and they can become less predictable and a lot less safe. So we'll talk to our engineer about this if we need to carve out an exemption for very unique situations, but this is fairly standard language in the development world. Okay, public street requirement. This is where we're saying all streets need to be public. That is the standard method of ensuring that we have good access and interconnectivity throughout our community. So the standard is public street. Now I did add some language in here to follow the private street option that Weber County had. I don't know if we have any appetite whatsoever to have private streets. Or if there's even a need to have private streets. Generally, they're in difficult to develop areas and areas that the city does not want to take over long-term maintenance. And so we'll allow for a developer to develop it, but they retain in perpetuity, the maintenance and operation of that street. this is a section we'll want
We
to
have
chat
design
about.
Standards for private.
I don't think that we do.
Yeah.
No,
So
but if
it's-
you look at this language in here, it does indicate that we would require them, if it were to be allowed to be private. Let's see.
So would that, is a private street like a flag lot?
It's like a private lane.
Okay,
Basically,
going
it's
down to
it's a
house.
street that is not maintained and operated by the city. The owner could potentially put a gate on that street as long as it's accessible by the fire department.
Okay.
Um,
They have to still meet fire access.
Correct. It's just a designation between public and private. And if it is private, then technically the owner would theoretically have the ability to close off access to non-public.
Right.
But then that kind of has some concern with the fire marshal because they still have to access for emergencies. So there's certain things as gated communities, but there's ability for fire and EMS to access those communities with what they call them Knox boxes, where it's like a master key that only the fire department has. There are also automated gate systems where they can get in. So there's ways around it. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if we want to have a private street option, here's some potential language that could be considered. I don't know that there's anywhere in town necessarily that we need to have private streets. Generally, we want to have a very well interconnected street network. And it's to everybody's benefit to have public streets where you can widely access a community. But there may be some unique situations where a private street could be allowed where the city does not want to retain that maintenance, but feel as if it doesn't necessarily mean it can't be developed. An idea.
Wasn't that Aspen Meadows subdivision over here initially developed as a private street and then the city later took it over?
Mhm.
But that was a problem, right? Because it didn't, or no, okay, Alan, I don't know the whole background, but it is still
It's a
private,
PUD.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So if you look at this language carefully, it does have some good language to say, we are never obligated to take over the street. But if we ever wanted to, for whatever reason, we felt like we wanted that connectivity, there is a way we could take it over, but it would have to meet standards before we take it over, those types of things.
So public streets, private streets, is there another name for the streets inside? HOAs that they maintain?
So most HOA streets are public,
Because the one I live in, I don't think is.
not
because-
all of them though.
Yeah, so that is. If it's not maintained by the city at all, then it's considered private.
The classification would be made before the development is approved. So the plat would indicate whether a street is private or public. And if it's private, it'll be labeled as such. And then the access, the maintenance and the ongoing usage would be private. So the HOA could at that point be the maintainer of that street network
Okay, because there's
Yeah.
just two streets, public and private.
under this proposal. Yeah, I don't really know of any other type of street other than public and private. I mean, maybe a toll road.
I was gonna say on those private streets, then could they gate those?
So this is where we would have to talk about whether or not we would allow them to be gated. Theoretically, if it's private, maybe then it could be gated, but then they would have to make sure the safety and access is maintained.
Road codes.
Yep. So the fire marshal would have to say, if you're gonna have it be private, there are certain
So they had to have
standards.
Some kind of system, so the fire truck come
Yes.
off the gate where we go.
Yeah, there's a whole code about it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on. Here's where the proposal really, the rubber hits the road, where we want to make sure we capture this idea of allowing for these non-terminal streets to move through. So if it is going to be terminal, we're going to classify them as either permanently terminal or temporarily terminal. The permanently terminal street is pretty much a cul-de-sac or a street that is allowed to be dead-ended because we don't envision it ever connecting anywhere else. There's, based on topography or whatever unique configuration, it's just not going to make a connection, and we're okay with it not making a connection. Then we'd say, okay, it'll be a permanently terminal street, cul-de-sac. This is where the fire code indicates that we would want to have no more than 30 dwellings on that permanently terminal street. So it's capped at the number of dwellings. And it's capped at the length of the 750 like we had in our code before. Okay. There's a turnaround requirement on those permanently terminal streets. So your cul-de-sac has to meet certain radiuses so a fire truck can get to the end and turn around. And the fire code does have a couple of different options for turnaround configuration. There's hammerheads and there's Y turnarounds. There's a couple options. But we're saying that if it is going to be permanent, then it does need to meet that turnaround requirement. So this basically matches our existing code. We're just reclassifying it as being permanently terminal. When we look at the temporarily terminal street, this is where a street is anticipated to continue with future development and grow organically from there. So got a couple of parameters. An applicant may extend a temporarily terminal street or street route beyond the maximum length of 750 feet if the extension A can be defined as temporarily terminal street or temporarily terminal street route. And I've added some definitions in this packet. We can go look at those in a minute, but they have to meet that definition. B, it has to run along the general alignment of a future street as shown in an applicable general plan, small area plan, master streets plan, development agreement, or similar legislatively adopted planning document. So if it is a guiding document that is vetted by the public, passed through Planning Commission, City Council, then that is where we would say, okay, this street is anticipated to extend. We know where it's going to extend to and the manner in which it will extend. Then we will allow you to go beyond 750 feet. And it needs to C, reduce the distance between the terminal street and the greater interconnected public street network as measured along the general alignment of the planned street. So what that language is meaning is, let's go to the master plan here. The next connection on this street network is to 2600 North. It's currently temporarily terminal at this point. And if we allow it to go beyond this point, it would need to generally follow and shrink the distance between where it is currently terminal and where it's anticipated to not be terminal in the future. Okay, so that's what those parameters are trying to get to. And then lastly, it needs to comply with the requirements of the local fire authority. So that's where the fire marshal would have to be involved in these discussions to make sure whatever the standard is meets their comfort level. Okay. Moving on, talking about the number of lots that could be allowed along that terminal street network. And this again still meets fire code, but a secondary emergency egress and fire access road as approved by the local fire authority shall connect to the temporarily terminal street to the greater interconnected street network before more than 30 residential lots are allowed to gain sole access from the street. Additionally, at no time shall more than 30 residential lots be allowed to gain sole access, a typo, from the street between the street's intersection and the nearest secondary emergency egress at the street's terminus. So this language, it still somewhat handcuffs future development in the sense of along this street network, we cannot exceed 30 homes unless there is a secondary emergency egress made. Now that secondary emergency egress doesn't necessarily have to meet our road standard. It just has to meet the standard of a fire access road. So it could be a temporary lane that is brought up to road base, maybe 8 inches of road base that would be able to hold 75,000 pounds and be a certain width. So let's say that this road connects further down. We're not at 30 homes yet. And if at some point we do get to 30 homes, then we would need to find a way to have an emergency egress, or at least a lane that meets emergency egress to the public street network. Now, this language meets fire code, but it still somewhat hinders our ability to get this to connect. So that's where we're going to have to, I guess, look at the elephant in the room and say, how do we get this, this network to connect if we're going to follow fire code?
Right, because that emergency egress still would go through multiple property owners.
Correct. So
parcels
there'd
right
be some negotiation. These property owners would have to figure out how to work together to maybe provide an access easement, at least enough improvements to where that fire access road could come out. But the other thing is this road could connect, as that transportation master plan shows, maybe up to this power line road or along that 2600 North alignment. As long as there's not more than 30 homes then we're okay. And so maybe we have this extension connect down to here. We haven't exceeded 30 homes, but then more homes can be divided in the future. Okay. So this is language that would meet the fire code. It still has some limitation on our ability to just endlessly develop on a dead end street. Okay. And then lastly, there's still a turnaround requirement. So no matter how long the street gets, it still has to have adequate turnaround. Okay. That's the crux of the connectivity portion of this proposal. Okay. There's a few other things in here talking about block lengths. Generally speaking, we don't want our blocks to be any longer than 1,320 feet, but we also don't want them to be much shorter than 500. But if we do have a longer block that goes over 800 feet, it would be beneficial to have at least a trail access point at the midpoint of that block, so that we preserve some pedestrian interconnectivity. Half streets, we don't currently allow for half streets. Well, I should say we frown upon half streets. We do allow them, but it's not our preference. But sometimes there's half streets that need to go between two property owners. And if we're going to allow a half street, that's where we want to make sure that that half does function as a full width of asphalt. And then when the next property next door comes through, that they would complete those improvements of our standard cross section, and that full road at that point would be present. So here's just a little bit of language that will allow for those half streets to be a little bit more defined than what we currently have. Okay. So that's in the subdivision ordinance as far as connectivity, interconnectivity with subdivisions. Again, striking the section that currently exists for access. But what I wanted also to talk about is an option in our subdivision ordinance to incentivize good connectivity. We've got a couple of different subdivision methods. We've got the standard method. We've got the density determinant method, which is basically like a lot averaging, where some lots are allowed to be a little bit bigger. Some lots can then be a little bit smaller, but averaged over the parcel, all of the lots still meet the zoning minimum. And then we've got the density bonus option. So I haven't provided all the density bonus language here because there's not a change proposed. But one idea that we have seen function really well outside of our municipality is a subdivision connectivity incentive. What this basically means, I'm going to pull up an example from Weber County because that's what I'm familiar with. You're going to get sick of seeing Weber County, I think, but it's good to see. I'm a visual type of a person. I don't know about you guys, but it helps me kind of wrap my head around what the language is trying to do. So this is in the Ogden Valley, north of Huntsville, in the Liberty area. We had a subdivision come in right here. This larger box is exactly 9 acres, and it's in a 3-acre zone. And it was literally exactly 9 acres in a 3-acre zone. So if they dedicated right of way, they would be sub 9 acres. They would not be able to get 3 lots. So, but we knew that this roadway was a road we wanted to connect into this landlocked piece back here. And the other thing is there was a disproportionate exaction on this owner in order to get a full width right of way around this existing home. So we worked with the developer. We said, we'll allow you to have 3 lots if you dedicate a disproportionate amount of right of way through and around. We'll allow you to have substandard lots, 3 acre, just a slight bit under. The city gets the road we want. The owner gets made whole with their 3 lots and everybody's happy, right? But our ordinance didn't allow for this to happen because it required that dedication at the time of subdivision. And there was no incentive for us to say, we'll omit that right of way to allow this to go through at a 3 acre minimum. So we kind of found a way around this where we actually gave them a private lane. We platted the subdivision with no right of way dedication, but an agreement where they would immediately after recording the 3 lots would then deed us the right of way back over, kind of a workaround. But what we then did afterwards, we said this would work very well in a lot of situations where we both see that there's a mutually beneficial scenario. And let's find a way to do it through the subdivision process where they can dedicate it on the plat. So we came up with an incentive, a connectivity incentive where if they provide the road in the manner that is preferred by the planners, engineers, and the master planning for the area, then we would let them calculate their density without using the road right of way. They still couldn't use any of the sensitive lands, any of the steep slopes, all that still had to be pulled out, but we'd give them at least the area in the right of way so that they would make the decision to give us that connectivity that had a better layout for the city, even though it may not be the best layout for them to maximize their potential developability of the lots. Okay, so that's a practical application of what this language is intended to do. And it's exactly that. The way that this language is written is we will give you, we're not entitled to give you, nor are we obligated to give you this incentive. But if we see that there's an opportunity for us to get a better connectivity than what you would prefer, because it doesn't necessarily allow you to maximize your developability, then we can make the decision through the Planning Commission, City Council to grant this incentive to let them omit their right of way from their density calculation. But we wouldn't let them off the hook from some of these ineligible areas where we already know that they have to give us road in certain areas. So this transportation master plan, for example, this is non-negotiable. It's already an exaction that we are entitled to if a developer comes through in these areas and want to develop. But what we're saying is if they make connectivity within the inner portion of their subdivision, that is more beneficial to the city and maybe less beneficial to them, then we'll find a way to make them whole. We'll give them a little bit of extra area to where they might be able to save 1 or 2 lots at the end of the day. But we get a better interconnected street network. The developer gets made whole on that, and everybody's happy, so to speak. So that is this language. If you read through it, we could talk about it in detail, but that's the intent. Now, this is something that it's on the drawing board, whether you guys like it or not, let us know. But it has worked well to provide some flexibility to both the city and the developer when we're trying to find the best connection options, especially in the context of surrounding properties and undeveloped properties in the vicinity. Because it is piecemeal. I mean, each property goes one at a time, and so it's piecemealed. And so it's hard to master plan when there's so much ownership and so much variety in the parcel configurations and how we get everything to connect well. This is I guess an incentive, a tool in our tool belt that we can pull out when we think it's appropriate. We're not obligated to use it, nor are they entitled to use it. But when it makes sense, we can look at it on a case-by-case basis, and we can give them a little bit of an incentive to give us as a city a better outcome, and them as well as the developer to also help them come to the table on a configuration that they technically don't have to give, because they're able to provide access to the lots in their subdivision in a design configuration that maximizes its potential, but maybe doesn't provide the best interconnectivity to other parcels surrounding them. Okay. So that's what this language is intended to do. Do you guys have any initial thoughts on that or concerns of introducing this type of an incentive? Okay.
I think it makes sense to me.
Yeah. I don't have any concerns about it.
Okay. Feel free to read through it in more detail. Like I had mentioned in our email this week, this language it's the first time we put it on paper. And I'd like to take it to our engineer and the fire marshal to get their thoughts on it as well. Make sure that everybody's happy before we put it forward for a more formal review. But this is the intent so far. Okay. And then the rest of the red lines that we didn't go over are intended to support what is drafted. So at the beginning of the document, there's a couple of definitions that are needed. For example, there's a definition in here for base density. As we're calculating that incentive, we need to know how we calculate base density. We already had street defined in our code, but it was not in alphabetical order, and it was annoying me. So I cut it and put it in alphabetical order. And then there's two, there should be one more up here. There's one for street or street route, temporarily terminal. That's a new term that we've introduced in that terminal street language that we need to define. Okay. Any questions, generally speaking? Okay. Now, I think the thing that we're going to have to get down to brass tacks on is this language regarding where did it go? Not that one. This number of lots. So that's line 450. So the intent here is that we don't handcuff ourselves. We allow streets to go longer than 750. Where we may run into another issue is that maximum of 30 on anything that extends beyond 750, you're still capped at 30 homes. And that may get us a little bit closer to these inner blocks, but it might not be enough of an allowance to really make it to the end of this no man's land, so to speak. So it's kind of one of those things where we're gonna have to talk to the fire marshal and just see how comfortable they are allowing us to potentially go longer than 750 with also allowing us to go over 30 homes. Now, the fire code does allow this to happen if those additional homes are sprinklered, but that introduces about a $30,000 to $40,000 cost per home, the fire sprinkler, and nobody's going to want to do that. So the fire marshal does have discretion, and so we'll need his guidance on this. But that's a conversation we'll be having in the next couple of days to vet this language and see if there's any major red lines that we're crossing that just are not comfortable with. So our next planning commission meeting, I'll report back on that conversation and let you know where there may or may not be some issues with the language as it is, or if we can maybe change that a little bit to open up a little bit more flexibility to get our inner blocks connected in a reasonable manner. Okay.
Great.
Okay. Any other questions on that? You're welcome to read through the red lines. Give me a call if as you're reading through those in detail. If there's anything that you need clarification on, always happy to chat about them.
Okay. Ready to move on, everyone? Okay, Scott, item number 2.
Okay, we're supposed to be out of here in 7 minutes, so I hear there's some basketball games that are.
It's all right.
We'll jump into it here. So I believe Nan, Kenny, and Teresa were all able to attend the training on TDRs, right? I wanted to throw this out there just so everybody has a chance to see what they are. This may be a tool that we analyze and maybe introduce in our general plan that's coming up. It's basically a way to not increase density, but to move it from one part of town to the other in areas where we want density moved to and where we don't want it to be. So again, we're going to look at Weber County because they're one of the few in the state that has a TDR ordinance established.
So Scott, when we're moving density, does that mean we're rezoning parcels
Quasi.
to accommodate the density where we want it and to down zone the areas where we want it to be open space?
Yep. So it's a way of rezoning without rezoning. It's designating where we want less density and where we want more density. It's not rezoning it on a parcel by parcel basis. It's saying in this general area of town, we're okay with more density so long as we're reducing density in another part of town. But as a whole, we're not increasing density from our existing entitlements under our existing zoning. So the tide isn't rising. It's the waves are kind of pulling from one side to the other in town.
And that was where the training, oh, sorry, Nan.
No, I just say that's what they kept saying. We're not rezoning this, but
That's where I was confused.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
my understanding, I wasn't sure in that training how they were defining a development right, because my understanding was if I own a 10-acre lot or parcel that I'm just farming right now, but it's zoned as like RE1.
Yep.
I can develop within that zone right now without needing some kind of development rights to be able to do that, right?
You do, but you have those rights already vested on your property. So just for quick, easy math, you have 1 acre of land in a 1 acre zone and your property already fronts a street. You have access, you have utilities, you don't have to dedicate any more land for street right of way. You have 1 development right in your pocket as we speak. So
Okay.
that does,
Mhm.
that's already granted
Unit.
to you. You don't have to go and ask for it. You can pull a building permit today and build your home. So again, looking back at this example, the 9 acres, these guys technically had 2 and change, because if they had to dedicate a full amount of right of way, they would be sub 9 acres in a 3 acre zone. So you divide that by 3, they can't get a full 3 lots out of it. So they're entitled to 2 and change, but it depends on how the road is configured that will determine exactly how many development rights they have. But your development right is based in the zoning for your property.
So, but back to that example I had where if I had 10 acres that was zoned RE1
Mhm.
and the city determines that we wanted that to be left open space.
Mhm.
So I sell those development rights, those 10 development rights that I would have
Mhm.
To someone who wants to build instead.
Elsewhere,
And then,
Let's just say
so
it goes-
my land can no longer be developed
correct?
for the rest of time.
Yep, so there'd be a conservation easement put on your property that would prohibit it from being developed. Those rights would go to your, let's just say it goes right next door to your neighbor, same zone, 10 acres. They could then put 20 units on their 10 acres instead of just 10. They're
So we would
based-
rezone that in that case.
The zoning would stay the same.
That was,
Oh, that's so
it
confusing.
It
was
is
just the
confusing.
unit, what do they call it? Units or
A
rights or
development,
whatever.
right?
But see, if they were already developing at the maximum capacity for that zone, we've just doubled the capacity. but
Right.
Kept it the same.
Correct. But we've
Right.
determined we're okay with that ahead of
Okay.
time through
Okay.
this TDR
Because
process.
where they're putting it. Because
Yeah.
where they're putting
Yeah,
it. Yeah, it was interesting.
Okay, let's take a look at this map. This is the future land use map for Ogden Valley. So this is the unincorporated areas of Weber County. They've got 2 planning areas because Weber County is big, so they've split it up into 2 planning areas. They have a planning commission for the upper valley, Ogden Valley. They have a planning commission for the lower valley, which is like the far west and west of far west area of Weber County. But in this particular planning area, their general plan put together this future land use map. And it basically said they put some circles around areas where they believe to be village nodes, where they think the density should cluster together. They want to incentivize the preservation of the open farmland outside of those village areas. Okay, so they did not want to show a future land use where they had upzoned properties. They wanted to keep their density capped and they wanted to just direct where that density could be realized. So in this area, they've basically said anything outside of these red circles is a sending area and everything inside the red is a receiving area. And they're generally, these are not meant to be survey specific red dotted lines, but in a nutshell, we want to allow for some density to go into Liberty, the Nordic Valley ski area, up in the Wolf Creek area, over in Eden, Newtown, Old Town, and then over in Huntsville. Everywhere else that's open farmland, we would like that it not develop at its full potential. This is not a mandate. This is an incentive. So these property owners that own all this farm ground, they don't have to participate, but they can if they want. So if grandma wants to keep her farm field open, she can sell her development rights, monetize that property right by selling those development rights, keep her farm field open, but still be able to get a financial return on that land without developing it. But the community as a whole has decided we prefer this development pattern over sprawl, 1 home every 3 acres throughout the whole valley floor. Okay,
So who's gonna pay grandma? The developer that does the other one?
that's right. So if
Sorry.
So
Oh, I
let's-
just said who's gonna pay grandma? So she
So the developer who wants to realize those rights elsewhere,
pays for him.
they pay for them.
and who determines the market value of development rights?
It's a free open market, so it depends on the demand. It
Grandma.
depends.
So
Grandma
grandma
determines.
Whatever grandma wants.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Weber County started this process. There's no MLS for available development rights. It really is word of mouth until it gets a little bit more established. And then maybe there's a marketplace. Maybe Zillow actually creates a category for available development rights that are for sale. But yeah, it's an open market. This type of an allowance is passed down from the state. So there's a section in state code that says you may have a TDR process, but you may not use TDRs until you have an ordinance. And that's
Hmm.
basically all it says. It's like 4 lines in the entire state code that provides this allowance.
Interesting.
And so before or if we want to do this, generally you identify it as a desired development tool to be used in our general plan. So if we think it's a good idea, we could say as a goal in our general plan, let's explore TDRs as a way to direct growth where we want it. And then after the general plan passes, then we could go through the ordinance creation process to establish that ordinance. And then once that ordinance is adopted, then property owners in our city could take advantage of that allowance. But we've already determined through that ordinance and that process, where is a sending area and where is a receiving area. So it's basically predetermining where we're going to upzone and downzone in town.
Mhm.
It's a tool. A lot of communities have looked at it. Some communities had said, no, thank you. Nibley is going through that right now as we speak. Their planning commission actually gave a negative recommendation and they're waiting to see what their city council thinks.
Mhm.
So it's not for everybody. It works in some cases. It doesn't work in other cases. TDRs were the reason why the Canyons Village was created in the Snyderville Basin. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that area. In the 90s, before the Olympics came, a bunch of property owners got together in the Snyderville Basin area. And they, Summit County had recently passed a TDR ordinance. And the property owners in this area wanted to preserve the hillside and cluster their development. So here's Kimball Junction. South of Kimball Junction, you look up at the hillside and there's the Canyons Village, right? And then there's the multi-million-dollar mansions on the hillside known as, it's not the Canyon, the Colony is what it's called. But what it was is we had a whole lot of land and a bunch of landowners here that got together and said, we don't want to develop the hillside, but we want to make sure that we can monetize our development rights. They put together a development agreement, transferred their development rights that were on the hillside and clustered them down in the resort core. And that's how Canyons Village became a thing. And in exchange for that, there's also a bunch of open space that was set aside over in this reserve area. It's a nature reserve down in the flatland. But that's an early example of TDR use in the state of Utah. At the end of the day, I wanted to make sure you guys understood this is a tool that the state allows us to use if we want to. You don't have to. It may be a topic of discussion that comes up as we get into the general plan as a potential tool to direct future growth, depending on what we prefer our development pattern to look like in the next 20 years. We don't have to use it. There's other methods such as cluster subdivisions which we have. So I want to just kind of give everybody a synopsis, give you a chance to ask questions. We can get into the weeds on it if you'd like, but that is transferable development rights in a nutshell.
I feel like it's like, it kind of makes sense, I guess, but it feels like down the road, it'll be confusing because you'll have a parcel that will be zoned something, but you can clearly see that it's much denser than it's zoned.
Administratively, it's a nightmare to track. I'll tell you
Yeah,
that.
right, yeah.
We in Weber County, we had the idea, let's do TDRs. When you get to figuring out how you track these things and make sure that, it doesn't slip through the cracks and you let something be built on preserved land, it's a nightmare to track.
Like it almost seems, that's what I was thinking. It almost seems simpler to just rezone it.
Yeah. But by rezoning, you are inflating the number of units total that are allowable in your community.
Well, then downzone the part that you want
But those property owners are never going to want to do that.
other people that are.
It's interesting.
Be interested in. So then you're affecting their rights. They
Correct.
already have.
You're downzoning those guys and taking away property rights from an owner at that point. The
From like
TDR
the
allows.
grandma who wanted to keep her,
So she was able to sell her rights under the TDR ordinance and gain
okay.
monetarily
right?
without downzoning.
Yeah, okay.
It can be done. It just, you need to be very specific administratively to track these, make sure the conservation easements are established so that those preserved spaces stay preserved. It can be done. It's just, it's a challenge.
Interesting.
Yeah. Anyways,
Okay,
that's that.
that's it.
Yep.
Any staff business, Scott, we need to know about?
There's one thing coming up in June, but we have to make an application by the 17th of March if we want to participate in what's called the Utah Growing Water Smart Workshop. It's a lot of words there, but what it is it's a free workshop, multi-day. It's 3 full days where the state has funding where we can go to a workshop and work through our water conservation goals. Last year in the legislature, we were required to inject a water portion into our general plan that ties water usage to land use. And we have a deadline by 2025 to put that into our general plan. This is a very good opportunity for us to sit down with some experts over 3 days, hammer out the details and get a really good start on this requirement that we can then roll into the general plan process, which will likely be underway by June. So the curiosity I have is if anybody on this board would like to attend as a team member, we're allowed to have between 5 and 10 team members mixed between staff, planning commissioners, elected appointed officials, members of the public that may be knowledgeable on these things. My thought was maybe we would have one from planning commission that could commit to a full 3 days. It's at Utah State, so it's not far from home, but it's June 6th, 7th, and 8th. So it's like a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Maybe it's a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's midweek. But it's a pretty big ask from a time availability. Yeah, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But it's a very good opportunity where the city can get basically free consulting and guidance to help us achieve that requirement ahead of the deadline. So we will likely have a couple of staffers. Probably will extend an invitation to a city council member and try to get a team together of between 5 and 10. So anybody initially that has interest, we have to make application by the 17th of March. So even though it's not until June, we have to put our team together and apply by the 17th so they can get the ball rolling because it's a fairly intensive workshop where they have a lot of materials. They have consultants coming in that have been paid by the state through grant funding. So put that out there. Not sure if anybody's got 3 days they can set aside and join us for that, but that's an opportunity that we'll probably try to take advantage of.
Okay.
Okay. Let me know if you're able. Send me an email or if you're interested, let us know.
Okay.
Okay. That's it.
All righty. Thank you. Next meeting is the 16th. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move, we adjourn.
All right. Kenny moved and Heron seconded